Millennials, we've had it rough. We look around at the world today, we see what's going on, the price of homes, how can we get assets, jobs, careers, we're competing with baby boomers. A Wall Street Journal article came out expressing that millennials, when adjusted for inflation, have about 25% more wealth than Gen Xers and baby boomers did at a similar age. Now, when you look at the data, that is true, but it's not that simple. And I think it leaves out a much bigger picture, which we're going to dive into, because a lot of millennials look at that and scoff. There's no way that could be, because the reality in which we live is so different from this idea that we are way better off than our predecessors, the baby boomers, in how they lived their life and the opportunities they had. So how could that be? And that's why I'm here to break down exactly how millennials got to where they are, to take a look at which generation is really better off financially. Well, to understand this, we first have to get an understanding of key factors that have led us to where we are in the world. The first is to understand that the United States is big, like really big. With the United States proportionately laid over Europe, the United States is massive and dominates the size of Europe, and that's not even including Alaska. The United States has everything from tundra to tropical areas, deserts, rainforests, everything in between. And the reality that makes up the United States is not even. These differences create the perception and reality that we live in. This is a map of the United States that shows the population change in residents. States like Utah, Idaho, Texas have huge population increases as a percentage, as opposed to states where they actually had negative population growth. Population growth is one of the key factors in economic success. It is one of the key factors in wealth creation. Now, this is just the last 4 years. Those states that had high population growth also had massive changes in their home prices. States like Idaho, Montana, Florida, and Maine all saw their home prices skyrocket in the last 4 years. So people that lived in areas that had mass population growth saw huge percentage increases in their homes. Areas that had low population growth, they could see stagnant or even declining value in their homes. If you are a homeowner, this is a major, if not the most contributor to your wealth. So the disparity of people in the United States and where they sit financially is very dependent on where you live. We also factor your age, marital status, income, and even sex when we're looking at how we perceive the world and our surroundings, your life and your economic status, and how you perceive if you're doing better or worse off. This is represented in the massive shift and change that we see of people in the United States in their political leanings. We can see this as we look at the spread of voters and incomes. The Democratic Party is vastly represented by lower income and upper income, where the Republican Party is vastly represented by the middle of the income spectrum. Under 30 is vastly Democratic with 60%. The older you get, the more that shifts to being Republican. Now, although this is politics, it does show the vast change in our perception of the reality that we live in. Baby boomers that are married and wealthy versus millennials that are lower income and unmarried see the world in very different ways. And that divide has gotten bigger. Even how we spend our lives has dramatically changed from these two generations. Comparing both generations at the age of 30, those that have lived on their own from 1983 to now has dropped from 80% to 60%. Those that live with a child in 1983 was almost at 60%, now it's almost at 30%. Those that have ever married has gone from 80% to 40%. And those that own a home have dropped dramatically. Just take a look at the daily lives of men in the United States from 2000 to 2019. When you look at the average daily hours, the activities like sleeping, working, socializing, and household activities have changed dramatically. It is a complete change in the way these generations live their life, view the world, and it shows a large divide. This is spurred on by urbanization. We can see since 1990 to 2030, the expectation and what has changed. We have become more and more urbanized, people living in cities and maybe not owning homes. And this has largely been brought on by millennials and Gen Xers. They've moved to cities for not just work opportunities, but lifestyle choices. These things that make up the foundation of the people that live in the United States and the two generations have a huge effect on their wealth. And now we're going to take a look at how those things are affecting the outcome of our lives, particularly monetarily. But there's no way we can have any kind of financial discussion unless we're talking about the almighty Fed, because the Fed is the one that controls things like the cost of money. And the cost of money directly is reflected in things like assets and the cost of goods and services, how much value a dollar has. One of the defining economic attributes between these two generations and really has led to a haves and have-nots in the United States. Right now, financing for real estate is really hard, even for self-storage. The markets are very challenging. Live Oak Bank is a specialist in financing for self-storage, including SBA loans. They are one of the leaders in financing all sorts of deals and deal size. We trust Live Oak Bank for their specialty in self-storage, their unique approach, and how they help their customers go through the process so there's no surprises. That in itself is a testament to their exceptional service and support. So whether you're looking to acquire, build, or expand a storage facility, Live Oak Bank has to be number one on your list to call. Click the link below right now so you can experience the difference that a dedicated self-storage partner can really make. So first, let's look back prior to 1980 at interest rates. Well, we should note that interest rates have been above 6% all the way until really 2008. This factor defined the generation that we call baby boomers. They lived in an environment in which millennials have never seen. In fact, the highest interest rate that millennials have experienced in their adult lifetime is simply going to the lowest interest rate levels that baby boomers saw in theirs. Let's look at the last 30 years. Since 1995, we've gone from 9% interest rate to 2020 when we saw under 3%. In the last few years, that has shot up to 6 and 7%. That is a dramatic change in a very short period of time, which is dominating millennials' lives. But really, we have to compare the two. Take a look at how it looks for each generation at the age of 30 to really see what the effects are. Starting at the age of 30, millennials had never seen interest rates above 4.5 until 2022. Their adult life had been dominated by lower interest rates. Now, I am an older millennial, right? I'm like the first, 1984, and I was in the workforce right before 2008. A lot of millennials, though, were not. They did not even join the workforce until after 2008, experiencing extremely low interest rates. Now, look at baby boomers. At the age of 30, Their interest rate started on average at 9%, a level that millennials have still never seen. In fact, the average baby boomer didn't see below 8% interest rate until they were 55. They were almost 60 years old until they saw an interest rate at the level that millennials have today. Now, why is this such an important factor? Well, it's important because the baby boomers' primary source of wealth came from owning a home. The second was through pensions and the stock market. Owning a home and home ownership is the largest wealth creation for the average American. But we also have to then understand what the opportunities were to each generation. This defines millennials. Millennials put off home ownership more than any other generation we had seen. After 2008, there was a surplus of housing inventory. We had the lowest prices that we had seen in generations. We had interest rates that weren't anywhere close to anything anyone had ever seen. But millennials were scarred. Millennials went through and saw all of their parents go bankrupt in the housing crisis. Millennials began to believe and think that owning a home was stupid, and they did not want to repeat their parents' mistakes. In fact, that culture didn't change for almost a decade. And by that time, home prices had risen dramatically due to low interest rates. But the homes of today, the homes that millennials are buying, are not the same homes that the baby boomers were buying. Let's compare at similar ages. So baby boomers at the age of 30 or 35, the average home size was 1,700 square feet, and the average number of people living in the home was 3+. That equals 567 square feet per person. Millennials, the average home size was 2,400 square feet, and the average household size was 2.5 people, or 960 square feet. That may not sound like a large amount, but it's 69.3% more home than their predecessors. This also doesn't include the fact that home appliances that are standardized. Baby boomers, that was not nearly as mainstream. So now that we understand a little more layout of a comparison between the two generations, the number one driver of wealth, and the circumstances that they were living in, we have to understand this effect that low interest rates has on the economy as a whole. The devaluing of the dollar drives up asset prices. This asset price boom is what creates wealth. The baby boomers were on a ride of high interest rates to low interest rates, which drove the wealth from the stock market, from their home, from businesses, as money got cheaper and the dollar got devalued and asset prices went up. But it also created a huge divide, and that was the haves and have-nots. Put simply, if you owned assets, you were the haves, and if you didn't, you were the have-nots, because asset inflation, due to monetary manipulation, outpaced dramatically the average salary. With all of that appreciation, asset owners have more risk, especially when using debt like owning a home. And that's why baby boomers have rates of bankruptcy that millennials have not only never seen, in a lot of cases, the world hadn't seen. They went through a lot of hard economic times. And that was catapulted in 2008, where the number one person that got hurt was homeowners, which at that point, millennials were just coming of age. This decimated so many baby boomers and was a financial burden that millennials, we have not experienced. But we did experience it through the other generation. That is why millennials overall put off buying homes, even when incomes were relatively the same, and savings and home prices to income and interest rates were better than they had ever been and probably ever will be again. This leads us to the Wall Street Journal article. Millennials that did not put off investing, that did not put off assets, they were abnormally affected by wealth creation because they came of age at a time when all assets went on sale. And those that started buying it from 2008 to 2016-18 were disproportionately benefited as the Fed dropped interest rates to nothing and we went through an economic boom. Those millennials, they left baby boomers in the dust, especially ones that were financially devastated because they were the assets that now millennials were buying on sale. So, does that mean that millennials are better off than baby boomers? Not necessarily, because you have to remember that the millennial age group really started in 1984 with my generation. Millennials that came 10 years after didn't get those opportunities. They weren't in the workforce. They did not have the ability to buy. Later, when they came of age, prices had not only readjusted, but they had gone way up. But something else started to happen. You see, with these financial crises and then COVID, the government printed like crazy. And that affected money in a way that it had not before because the printing was so incredible. The amount of debt the country took on was so incredible, it devalued the dollar and we got inflation. Younger millennials had to deal with entering in the workforce, skyrocketing housing prices, skyrocketing inflation, and on top of that, the Fed rolled out extremely high interest rates to affect the increase in inflation. They got hit with it all, right as all the millennials and baby boomers that went bankrupt were trying to buy houses. But here's the thing, we were millions and millions and millions of houses short because for years nobody built houses. So competition was rough. And that made housing prices skyrocket. For those millennials, it seems like opportunity would never come. Now, this is even further exaggerated by what we talked about at the first. Depending on where you lived and the environment in which you lived would depend on whether you partook of the great boom or how hard you were hit with high interest rates and inflation. So, although, yes, millennials have hit the highest wealth of any previous generation before, they also have the other end of that scale. They have the generation that even today have been hit abnormally hard. But here's the key. If we go back in time, you can do the exact same thing for baby boomers. We don't know what the future will be. And comparing a millennial at the age of 30 to someone that is 65 or 70, we're missing a large swath of time, yet still to come. But there's one thing that millennials should learn and never ever forget. Asset owners are winners. If you own assets over time, even with the ups and downs, you win. That means in order to benefit, you have to participate. But the great thing that millennials have going for them, they have YouTube and all sorts of other platforms to learn in a way that baby boomers did not. Today, it's a lack of opportunity, and opportunities change. So millennials can learn and are not financially ruined, so they're actually in a place to take advantage of those opportunities. So, in the United States, it is not just baby boomers versus millennials. It really is a tale of two cities. Where you live, the time frame in which you lived, and whether you are an asset owner or not will dominate your financial reality today. We can't change the past, but we can learn how to play the game. So use the lessons from the past, the mistakes and the things that baby boomers did right, and start implementing them in your life today. And if you want to learn more about how you can do that, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and start putting in the comments what you think are the major differences affecting both generations. Obviously, we don't have enough time to go through all of them. Let us know where you live and what you've seen, because the reality in America is different depending on who you are.